Black Clock Audio Tales 2019, Mary Shelley. Brought to you by BunnySlippers.com. Check out the brand new Dino sound slippers. Slippers make a roaring sound every 3 steps. Made with green, scaly-looking fabric that's actually a soft plush. Foam footbeds, non-slip grips on your soles so you don't slip around. One size fits most, up to women's 10.5, men's 9. Footbed measures 10.5. Black Clock Audio Tales is a daily podcast that reads you a story, either a chapter or 2 at a time, or a couple of short stories, maybe some folklore. Join us in our exploration of old ghost stories, supernatural fiction, horror tales, folk tales, fantasy, gothic horror, weird fiction, cosmic horror. And don't forget to join us at the end of the month, every last Tuesday of the month, where we have The People's Guide to the Cthulhu Mythos, where you get to hear me talk in a lot more dumb voices than right now. Look for us wherever you look for podcasts. Rate, review, and give us 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 stars. We don't like the 1 and 2 stars, but hey, if that's how you feel, you probably have a vendetta against us and don't know how to use the skip button. We are on the Instagram, the Facebook, and the Twitter as Black Clock Audio Tales, or just Google us, Black Clock Audio Tales. There's no one else named that, otherwise we wouldn't name it this. Thank you, and let's get going with The Last Man by Mary Shelley.
Recording by Lizzie Driver. The Last Man by Mary Wollstonecraft Shelley. Volume 1, Chapter 4a. Is there such a feeling as love at first sight? And if there be, in what does its nature differ from love founded in long observation and slow growth? Perhaps its effects are not so permanent, but they are, while they last, as violent and intense. We walk the pathless mazes of society, vacant of joy, till we hold this clue, leading us through that labyrinth to paradise. Our nature, dim, like to an unlighted torch, sleeps in formless blank till the fire attain it. This life of life, this light to moon, and glory to the sun. What does it matter, whether the fire be struck from flint and steel, nourished with care into a flame, slowly communicated to the dark wick, or whether swiftly the radiant power of light and warmth passes from a kindred power, and shines at once the beacon and the hope? In the deepest fountain of my heart the pulses were stirred. Around, above, beneath, the clinging memory as a cloak enwrapped me. In no one moment of coming time did I feel as I had done in time gone by. The spirit of Idris hovered in the air I breathed. Her eyes were ever and forever bent on mine. Her remembered smile blinded my faint gaze, and caused me to walk as one, not in eclipse, not in darkness and vacancy, but in a new and brilliant light, too novel, too dazzling for my human senses. On every leaf, on every small division of the universe, as on the hyacinth it is engraved, was imprinted the talisman of my existence. She lives! She is! I had not time yet to analyse my feeling, to take myself to task, and leash in the tameless passion. All was one idea, one feeling, one knowledge. It was my life. But the die was cast. Raymond would marry Idris. The marriage bells rung in my ears. I heard the nation's gratulation which followed the union. The ambitious noble uprose with swift eagle flight, from the lowly ground to regal supremacy, and the love of Idris. Yet not so. She did not love him. She had called me her friend, she had smiled on me, to me she had entrusted her heart's dearest hope, the welfare of Adrian. This reflection thawed my congealing blood, and again the tide of life and love flowed impetuously onward, again to ebb as my busy thoughts changed. The debate had ended at 3 in the morning. My soul was in tumults. I traversed the streets with eager rapidity. Truly I was mad that night. Love, which I have named a giant from its birth, wrestled with despair. My heart, the field of combat, was wounded by the iron heel of the one, watered by the gush of tears of the other. Day, hateful to me, dawned. I retreated to my lodgings. I threw myself on a couch. I slept. Was it sleep? For thought was still alive. Love and despair struggled still, and I writhed with unendurable pain. I awoke half stupefied. I felt a heavy oppression on me, but knew not whereof. I entered, as it were, the council chamber of my brain, and questioned the various ministers of thought therein assembled. Too soon I remembered all. Too soon my limbs quivered beneath the tormenting power. Soon, too soon, I knew myself a slave. Suddenly unannounced, Lord Raymond entered my apartment. He came in gaily, singing the Tyrolese song of liberty, noticed me with a gracious nod, and threw himself on a sofa opposite the copy of a bust of the Apollo Belvedere. After one or two trivial remarks, to which I sullenly replied, he suddenly cried, looking at the bust, "I am called like that victor. Not a bad idea. The head will serve for my new coinage, and be an omen to all dutiful subjects of my future success." He said this in his most gay, yet benevolent manner, and smiled, not disdainfully, but in playful mockery of himself. Then his countenance suddenly darkened, and in that shrill tone peculiar to himself, he cried, "I fought a good battle last night. Higher conquest the plains of Greece never saw me achieve. Now I am the first man in the state, burthen of every ballad, and object of old women's mumbled devotions. What are your meditations? You, who fancy that you can read the human soul, as your native lake reads each crevice and folding of its surrounding hills. Say what you think of me, king expectant, angel or devil, which?" This ironical tone was discord to my bursting, over-boiling heart. I was nettled by his insolence, and replied with bitterness, "There is a spirit, neither angel or devil, damned to limbo merely." I saw his cheeks become pale, and his lips whiten and quiver. His anger served but to enkindle mine, and I answered with a determined look his eyes which glared on me. Suddenly they were withdrawn, cast down. A tear, I thought, wetted the dark lashes. I was softened, and with involuntary emotion added, "Not that you are such, my dear lord." I paused, even awed by the agitation he evinced. "Yes," he said at length, rising and biting his lip, as he strove to curb his passion. "Such am I. You do not know me, Verney, neither you nor our audience of last night, nor does universal England know aught of me. I stand here, it would seem, an elected king. This hand about to grasp a sceptre, these brows feel in each nerve the coming diadem. I appear to have strength, power, victory, standing as a dome supporting column stands, and I am a reed. I have ambition, and that attains its aim. My nightly dreams are realized, my waking hopes fulfilled. A kingdom awaits my acceptance, my enemies are overthrown. But here," he struck his heart with violence, "here is the rebel, here the stumbling block, this overruling heart which I may drain of its living blood. But, while one fluttering pulsation remains, I am its slave." He spoke with a broken voice, then bowed his head, and hiding his face in his hands, wept. I was still smarting from my own disappointment, yet this scene oppressed me even to terror, nor could I interrupt his access of passion. It subsided at length, and throwing himself on the couch, he remained silent and motionless, except that his changeful features showed a strong internal conflict. At last he rose, and said in his usual tone of voice, "The time grows on us, Verney. I must away. Let me not forget my chiefest errand here. Will you accompany me to Windsor to-morrow? You will not be dishonoured by my society, and as this is probably the last service or disservice you can do me, will you grant my request?" He held out his hand with almost a bashful air. Swiftly I thought, yes, I will witness the last scene of the drama, besides which his mien conquered me, and an affectionate sentiment towards him again filled my heart. I bade him command me. "Ay, that I will," said he gaily. "That's my cue now. Be with me to-morrow morning by 7. Be secret and faithful, and you shall be groom of the stole ere long." So saying, he hastened away, vaulted on his horse, and with a gesture as if he gave me his hand to kiss, bade me another laughing adieu. Left to myself, I strove with painful intensity to divine the motion of his request, and foresee the events of the coming day. The hours passed on unperceived. My head ached with thought, the nerves seemed teeming with overfull fraught. I clasped my burning brow, as if my fevered hand could medicine its pain. I was punctual to the appointed hour on the following day, and found Lord Raymond waiting for me. We got into his carriage and proceeded towards Windsor. I had tutored myself, and was resolved by no outward sign to disclose my internal agitation. "What a mistake Ryland made," said Raymond, "when he thought to overpower me the other night. He spoke well, very well. Such an harangue would have succeeded better addressed to me singly, than to the fools and knaves assembled yonder. Had I been alone, I should have listened to him with a wish to hear reason. But when he endeavoured to vanquish me in my own territory, with my own weapons, he put me on my mettle, and the event was such as all might have expected." I smiled incredulously, and replied, "I am of Ryland's way of thinking, and will, if you please, repeat all his arguments. We shall see how far you will be induced by them, to change the royal for the patriotic style." "The repetition would be useless," said Raymond, "since I will remember them, and have many others self-suggested, which speak with unanswerable persuasion." He did not explain himself, nor did I make any remark on his reply. Our silence endured for some miles, till the country with open fields, or shady woods and parks, presented pleasant objects to our view. After some observations on the scenery and seats, Raymond said, "Philosophers have called man a microcosm of nature, and find a reflection in the internal mind for all this machinery visible at work around us. This theory has often been a source of amusement to me, and many an idle hour have I spent exercising my ingenuity in finding resemblances. Does not Lord Bacon say that the falling from a discord to a concord, which maketh great sweetness in music, hath an agreement with the affections, which are reintegrated to the better after some dislikes? What a sea is the tide of passion, whose fountains are in our own nature! Our virtues are the quicksands, which show themselves at calm and low water. But let the waves arise, and the winds buffet them, and the poor devil, whose hope was in their durability, finds them sink from under him. The fashions of the world, its exigencies, educations, and pursuits, are winds to drive our wills, like clouds, all one way. But let a thunderstorm arise in the shape of love, hate, or ambition, and the rack goes backward, stemming the opposing air in triumph." "Yes," replied I, "nature always presents to our eyes the appearance of a patient, while there is an active principle in man which is capable of ruling fortune, and at least of tacking against the gale, till it in some mode conquers it." "There is more of what is specious than is true in your distinction," said my companion. "Did we form ourselves, choosing our dispositions and our powers? I find myself, for one, as a stringed instrument with chords and stops, but I have no power to turn the pegs, or pitch my thoughts to a higher or lower key." "Other men," I observed, "may be better musicians." "I talk not of others, but myself," replied Raymond, "and I am as fair an example to go by as another. I cannot set my heart to a particular tune, or run voluntary changes on my will. We are born, we choose neither our parents nor our station, we are educated by others, or by the world's circumstance, and this cultivation, mingling with our own innate disposition, is the soil in which our desires, passions, and motives grow." "There is much truth in what you say," said I, "and yet no man ever acts upon this theory, who, when he makes a choice, says, 'Thus I choose, because I am necessitated.' Does he not on the contrary feel a freedom of will within him, which, though you may call it fallacious, still actuates him as he decides?" "Exactly so," replied Raymond, "another link of the breakless chain. Were I now to commit an act which would annihilate my hopes, and pluck the regal garment from my mortal limbs, to clothe them in ordinary weeds, would this, think you, be an act of free will on my part?" As we talked thus, I perceived that we were not going the ordinary road to Windsor, but through Englefield Green, towards Bishopgate Heath. I began to divine that Idris was not the object of our journey, but that I was brought to witness the scene that was to decide the fate of Raymond, and of course Perdita. Raymond had evidently vacillated during his journey, and irresolution was marked in every gesture as we entered Perdita's cottage. I watched him curiously, determined that, if this hesitation should continue, I would assist Perdita to overcome herself, and teach her to disdain the wavering love of him, who balanced between the possession of a crown and of her, whose excellence and affection transcended the worth of a kingdom. We found her in her flower-adorned alcove. She was reading the newspaper report of the debate in Parliament, that apparently doomed her to hopelessness. That heart-sinking feeling was painted in her sunk eyes and spiritless attitude. A cloud was on her beauty, and frequent sighs were tokens of her distress. This sight had an instantaneous effect on Raymond. His eyes beamed with tenderness, and remorse clothed his manners with earnestness and truth. He sat beside her, and taking the paper from her hand, said, "Not a word more shall my sweet Perdita read of this contention of madmen and fools. I must not permit you to be acquainted with the extent of my delusion, lest you despise me, although, believe me, a wish to appear before you, not vanquished but as a conqueror, inspired me during my wordy war." Perdita looked at him like one amazed. Her expressive countenance shone for a moment with tenderness. To see him only was her happiness. But a bitter thought swiftly shadowed her joy. She bent her eyes on the ground, endeavouring to master the passion of tears that threatened to overwhelm her. Raymond continued, "I will not act a part with you, dear girl, or appear other than what I am, weak and unworthy, more fit to excite your disdain than your love. Yet you do love me. I feel and know that you do, and thence I draw my most cherished hopes. If pride guided you, or even reason, you might well reject me. Do so. If your high heart, incapable of my infirmity of purpose, refuses to bend to the lowness of mine, turn from me if you will, if you can. If your whole soul does not urge you to forgive me, if your entire heart does not open wide its door to admit me to its very centre, forsake me, never speak to me again. I, though sinning against you almost beyond remission, I also am proud. There must be no reserve in your pardon, no drawback to the gift of your affection." Perdita looked down, confused yet pleased. My presence embarrassed her, so that she dared not turn to meet her lover's eye, or trust her voice to assure him of her affection. While a blush mantled her cheek, and her disconsolate air was exchanged for one expressive of deep-felt joy, Raymond encircled her waist with his arm, and continued, "I do not deny that I have balanced between you and the highest hope that mortal man can entertain, but I do so no longer. Take me, mould me to your will, possess my heart and soul to all eternity. If you refuse to contribute to my happiness, I quit England to-night, and will never set foot in it again. Lionel, you hear? Witness for me. Persuade your sister to forgive the injury I have done her. Persuade her to be mine." "There needs be no persuasion," said the blushing Perdita, "except your own dear promises, and my ready heart, which whispers to me that they are true. That same evening we all three walked together in the forest, and with the garrulity which happiness inspires, they detailed to me the history of their loves. It was pleasant to see the haughty Raymond and reserved Perdita changed through happy love into prattling, playful children, both losing their characteristic dignity in the fullness of mutual contentment. A night or two ago, Lord Raymond, with a brow of care and a heart oppressed with thought, bent all his energies to silence or persuade the legislators of England that a sceptre was not too weighty for his hand, while visions of dominion, war, and triumph floated before him. Now, frolicsome as a lively boy sporting under his mother's approving eye, the hopes of his ambition were complete, when he pressed the small fair hand of Perdita to his lips, while she, radiant with delight, looked on the still pool, not truly admiring herself, but drinking in with rapture the reflection there made of the form of herself and her lover, shown for the first time in dear conjunction. I rambled away from them. If the rapture of assured sympathy was theirs, I enjoyed that of restored hope. I looked on the regal towers of Windsor. High is the wall and strong the barrier that separate me from my star of beauty, but not impassable. She will not be his. A few more years dwell in thy native garden, sweet flower, till I by toil and time acquire a right to gather thee. Despair not, nor bid me despair. What must I do now? First I must seek Adrian, and restore him to her. Patience, gentleness, and untired affection shall recall him, if it be true, as Raymond says, that he is mad. Energy and courage shall rescue him, if he be unjustly imprisoned. After the lovers again joined me, we supped together in the alcove. Truly it was a fairy's supper, for though the air was perfumed by the scent of fruits and wine, we none of us either ate or drank. Even the beauty of the night was unobserved. Their ecstasy could not be increased by outward objects, and I was wrapped in reverie. At about midnight Raymond and I took leave of my sister to return to town. He was all gaiety, scraps of songs fell from his lips. Every thought of his mind, every object about us, gleamed under the sunshine of his mirth. He accused me of melancholy, of ill humour and envy. "Not so," said I, "though I confess that my thoughts are not occupied as pleasantly as yours are. You promised to facilitate my visit to Adrian. I conjure you to perform your promise. I cannot linger here. I long to soothe, perhaps to cure the malady of my first and best friend. I shall immediately depart for Dunkeld." "Thou bird of night," replied Raymond, "what an eclipse do you throw across my bright thoughts, forcing me to call to mind that melancholy ruin, which stands in mental desolation, more irreparable than a fragment of a carved column in a weed-grown field. You dream that you can restore him? Daedalus never wound so inextricable an error round Minotaur, as madness has woven about his imprisoned reason. Nor you, nor any other Theseus can thread the labyrinth, to which perhaps some unkind Ariadne has the clue. You allude to Evadne's Ione, but she is not in England." "And were she," said Raymond, "I would not advise her seeing him. Better to decay in absolute delirium, than to be a victim of the methodical unreason of ill-bestowed love. The long duration of malady has probably erased from his mind all vestige of her, and it were well that it should never again be imprinted. You will find him at Dunkeld. Gentle and tractable he wanders up the hills, and through the wood, or sits listening beside the waterfall. You may see him, his hair stuck with wild flowers, his eyes full of untraceable meaning, his voice broken, his person wasted to a shadow. He plucks flowers and weeds chaplets of them, or sails yellow leaves and bits of bark on the stream, rejoicing in their safety or weeping at their wreck. The very memory half unmans me. By heaven! The first tears I have shed since boyhood rushed scalding into my eyes when I saw him." It needed not this last account to spur me on to visit him. I only doubted whether or not I should endeavour to see Idris again before I departed. This doubt was decided on the following day. Early in the morning Raymond came to me. Intelligence had arrived that Adrian was dangerously ill, and it appeared impossible that his failing strength should surmount the disorder. "To-morrow," said Raymond, "his mother and sister set out for Scotland to see him once again." "And I go to-day," I cried. "This very hour I will engage a sailing balloon. I shall be there in 48 hours at furthest, perhaps in less if the wind is fair. Farewell, Raymond. Be happy in having chosen the better part in life. This turn of fortune revives me. I feared madness, not sickness. I have a presentiment that Adrian will not die. Perhaps this illness is a crisis, and he may recover." Everything favoured my journey. The balloon rose about 1/2 mile from the earth, and with a favourable wind it hurried through the air, its feathered vans cleaving the unopposing atmosphere. Notwithstanding the melancholy object of my journey, my spirits were exhilarated by reviving hope, by the swift motion of the airy pinnace, and the balmy visitation of the sunny air. The pilot hardly moved the plumed steerage, and the slender mechanism of the wings, wide unfurled, gave forth a murmuring noise, soothing to the sense. Plain and hill, stream and cornfield, were discernible below, while we, unimpeded, sped on swift and secure, as a wild swan in his spring-tide flight. The machine obeyed the slightest motion of the helm, and, the wind blowing steadily, there was no let or obstacle to our course. Such was the power of man over the elements, a power long sought and lately won, yet foretold in bygone time by the prince of poets, whose verses I quoted much to the astonishment of my pilot, when I told him how many hundreds of years ago they had been written. "O human wit, thou canst invent much ill, thou searchest strange arts, who would think by skill, and heavy man like a light bird should stray, and through the empty heavens find a way." I alighted at Perth, and, though much fatigued by a constant exposure to the air for many hours, I would not rest, but merely altering my mode of conveyance, I went by land instead of air to Dunkeld. The sun was rising as I entered the opening of the hills. After the revolution of ages, Burnham Hill was again covered with a young forest, while more aged pines, planted at the very commencement of the 19th century by the then Duke of Athol, gave solemnity and beauty to the scene. The rising sun first tinged the pine tops, and my mind, rendered through my mountain education deeply susceptible to the graces of nature, and now on the eve of again beholding my beloved and perhaps dying friend, was strangely influenced by the sight of those distant beams. Surely they were ominous, and as such I regarded them, good omens for Adrian, on whose life my happiness depended. Poor fellow! He lay stretched on a bed of sickness, his cheeks glowing with the hues of fever, his eyes half closed, his breath irregular and difficult. Yet it was less painful to see him thus, than to find him fulfilling the animal functions uninterruptedly, his mind sick the while. I established myself at his bedside. I never quitted it day or night. Bitter task was it, to behold his spirit waver between death and life, to see his warm cheek, and know that the very fire which burned too fiercely there, was consuming the vital fuel, to hear his moaning voice, which might never again articulate words of love and wisdom, to witness the ineffectual motions of his limbs, soon to be wrapped in their mortal shroud. Such for 3 days and nights appeared the consummation which fate had decreed for my labours, and I became haggard and spectre-like, through anxiety and watching. At length his eyes unclosed faintly, yet with a look of returning life. He became pale and weak, but the rigidity of his features was softened by approaching convalescence. What a brimful cup of joyful agony it was, when his face first gleamed with a glance of recognition, when he pressed my hand, now more fevered than his own, and when he pronounced my name! No trace of his past insanity remained to dash my joy with sorrow. This same evening his mother and sister arrived. The Countess of Windsor was by nature full of energetic feeling, but she had very seldom in her life permitted the concentrated emotions of her heart to show themselves on her features. The studied immovability of her countenance, her slow equable manner, and soft but unmelodious voice, were a mask, hiding her fiery passions and the impatience of her disposition. She did not in the least resemble either of her children. Her black and sparkling eye, lit up by pride, was totally unlike the blue lustre and frank benignant expression of either Adrian or Idris. There was something grand and majestic in her motions, but nothing persuasive, nothing amiable. Tall, thin, and straight, her face still handsome, her raven hair hardly tinged with grey, her forehead arched and beautiful, had not the eyebrows been somewhat scattered, it was impossible not to be struck by her, almost to fear her. Idris appeared to be the only being who could resist her mother, notwithstanding the extreme mildness of her character. But there was a fearlessness and frankness about her, which said that she would not encroach on another's liberty, but held her own sacred and unassailable. The Countess cast no look of kindness on my worn-out frame, though afterwards she thanked me coldly for my attentions. Not so Idris. Her first glance was for her brother. She took his hand, she kissed his eyelids, and hung over him with looks of compassion and love. Her eyes glistened with tears when she thanked me, and the grace of her expression was enhanced, not diminished, by the fervour which caused her almost to falter as she spoke. Her mother, all eyes and ears, soon interrupted us, and I saw that she wished to dismiss us quietly, as one whose services, now that his relatives had arrived, were of no use to her son. I was harassed and ill, resolved not to give up my post, yet doubting in what way I should assert it, when Adrian called me, and, clasping my hand, bade me not to leave him. His mother, apparently inattentive, at once understood what was meant, and seeing the hold we had upon her, yielded the point to us. The days that followed were full of pain to me, so that I sometimes regretted that I had not yielded at once to the haughty lady, who watched all my motions, and turned my beloved task of nursing my friend to a work of pain and irritation. Never did any woman appear so entirely made of mind as the Countess of Windsor. Her passions had subdued her appetites, even her natural wants. She slept little, and hardly ate at all. Her body was evidently considered by her as a mere machine, whose health was necessary for the accomplishment of her schemes, but whose senses formed no part of her enjoyment. There is something fearful in one who can thus conquer the animal part of our nature, if the victory be not the effect of consummate virtue. Nor was it without a mixture of this feeling that I beheld the figure of the Countess awake when others slept, fasting when I, abstemious naturally, and rendered so by the fever that preyed on me, was forced to recruit myself with food. She resolved to prevent or diminish my opportunities of acquiring influence over her children, and circumvented my plans by a hard, quiet, stubborn resolution that seemed not to belong to flesh and blood. War was at last tacitly acknowledged between us. We had many pitched battles, during which no word was spoken, hardly a look was interchanged, but in which each resolved not to submit to the other. The Countess had the advantage of position, so I was vanquished, though I would not yield. After the lapse of a few weeks, we left Dunkeld. Idris and her mother returned immediately to Windsor, while Adrian and I followed by slow journeys and frequent stoppages, occasioned by his continued weakness. As we traversed the various counties of fertile England, all wore an exhilarating appearance to my companion, who had been so long secluded by disease from the enjoyments of weather and scenery. We passed through busy towns and cultivated plains. The husbandmen were getting in their plenteous harvests, and the women and children, occupied by light rustic toils, formed groups of happy, healthful persons, the very sight of whom carried cheerfulness to the heart. One evening, quitting our inn, we strolled down a shady lane, then up a grassy slope, till we came to an eminence that commanded an extensive view of hill and dale, meandering rivers, dark woods, and shining villages. The sun was setting, and the clouds, straying like new-shorn sheep through the vast fields of sky, received the golden colour of his parting beams. The distant uplands shone out, and the busy hum of evening came, harmonized by distance, on our ear. Adrian, who felt all the fresh spirit infused by returning health, clasped his hands in delight, and exclaimed with transport, "O happy earth, and happy inhabitants of earth! A stately palace has God built for you, O man, and worthy are you of your dwelling. Behold the verdant carpets spread at our feet, and the azure canopy above. The fields of earth which generate and nurture all things, and the track of heaven which contains and clasps all things. Now at this evening hour, at the period of repose and refection, methinks all hearts breathe one hymn of love and thanksgiving, and we, like priests of old on the mountain tops, give a voice to their sentiment. Assuredly a most benignant power built up the majestic fabric we inhabit, and framed the laws by which it endures. If mere existence, and not happiness, had been the final end of our being, what need of the profuse luxuries which we enjoy? Why should our dwelling place be so lovely, and why should the instincts of nature minister pleasurable sensations? The very sustaining of our animal machine is made delightful, and our sustenance, the fruits of the field, is painted with transcendent hues, endued with grateful odours, and palatable to our taste. Why should this be, if he were not good? We need houses to protect us from the seasons, and behold the materials with which we are provided, the growth of trees with their adornment of leaves, while rocks of stone piled about the plains variegate the prospect with their pleasant irregularity. Nor are the outward objects alone the receptacles of the spirit of good. Look into the mind of men, where wisdom reigns enthroned, where imagination, the painter, sits, with his pencil dipped in hues lovelier than those of sunset, adorning familiar life with glowing tints. What a noble boon, worthy the giver, is the imagination! It takes from reality its leaden hue, it envelops all thought and sensation in a radiant veil, and with an hand of beauty beckons us from the sterile seas of life to her gardens, and bowers, and glades of bliss. And is not love a gift of the divinity? Love, and her child Hope, which can bestow wealth on poverty, strength on the weak, and happiness on the sorrowing. My lot has not been fortunate. I have consorted long with grief, entered the gloomy labyrinth of madness, and emerged, but half alive. Yet I thank God that I have lived. I thank God that I beheld his throne, the heavens and earth, his footstool. I am glad that I have seen the changes of his day, to behold the sun, fountain of light, and the gentle pilgrim moon, to have seen the fire-bearing flowers of the sky, and the flowery stars of earth, to have witnessed the sowing and the harvest. I am glad that I have loved, and have experienced sympathetic joy and sorrow with my fellow creatures. I am glad now to feel the current of thought flow through my mind, as the blood through the articulations of my frame. Mere existence is pleasure, and I thank God that I live. And all ye happy nurslings of Mother Earth, do ye not echo my words? Ye who are linked by the affectionate ties of nature, companions, friends, lovers, fathers, who toil with joy for their offspring, women, who, while gazing on the living forms of their children, forget the pains of maternity, children who neither toil nor spin, but love and are loved. Oh, that death and sickness were banished from our earthly home, that hatred, tyranny, and fear could no longer make their lair in the human heart, that each man might find a brother in his fellow, and a nest of repose amid the wide plains of his inheritance, that the source of tears were dry, and that lips might no longer form expressions of sorrow. Sleeping thus under the beneficent eye of heaven, can evil visit thee, O earth? Or grief cradle to their graves their luckless children? Whisper it not. Let the demons hear and rejoice. The choice is with us. Let us will it, and our habitation becomes a paradise. For the will of man is omnipotent, blunting the arrows of death, soothing the bed of disease, and wiping away the tears of agony. And what is each human being worth, if he did not put forth his strength to aid his fellow creatures? My soul is a fading spark, my nature frail as a spent wave, but I dedicate all of intellect and strength that remains to me to that one work, and take upon me the task, as far as I am able, of bestowing blessings on my fellow men." His voice trembled, his eyes were cast up, his hands clasped, and his fragile person was bent, as it were, with excessive emotion. The spirit of life seemed to linger in his form, as a dying flame on an altar flickers on the embers of an accepted sacrifice. End of chapter 4a.
Hey listeners, sorry for the interruption. More The Last Man coming up. But before that, I'd like to thank you for listening. We'd love to hear from you and your suggestions for future episodes and topic ideas at facebook.com/blackclockaudio. Help support the show by keeping it paywall free by going to paypal.me/pgttcm and donate $1 or $5 to pgttcm.podbean.com and become a patron. We'll never ask you for your info or ask you to fill out a survey, or just tell your friends about us. That's all we ask. Do you have no cash to donate? That's fine, neither do we. Help the show by sharing, rating, liking, or 5-star giving wherever you get your podcasts from. You can always buy a cool shirt from pgttcm.threadless.com, and if you're wondering, hey, what's all this pgttcm stuff about? People's Guide to the Cthulhu Mythos is our monthly end-of-the-month show where we talk to Cthulhu Mythos writers, game designers, talk about various aspects of the Cthulhu Mythos, going from the Big Bang to the cooling of our sun, just the whole kit and caboodle. From the perspective of Earthlings, of course. Next month is going to be Ambrose Bitter Bierce, one of my favorite weird fiction authors who also wrote Civil War tales and spooky dooky stories, and also, Occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge, that story your 8th or 9th grade English teacher made you read. Yeah, Ambrose Bierce, but we won't hold that against him. It's a good story, though. And in August, we're going to have Anyone But Derleth Cthulhu Mythos, non-Derlethian mythos stories, and more about August Derleth himself and Arkham House Publishing, and pretty much, kind of talk about why everyone makes fun of August Derleth, but without him, there's some stuff that would be missing. September, Bronte. Oh yeah, it's gonna be all about the Brontes. And, of course, we'll more than likely have Andrew Grace talking about the Brontes again, because Andrew Grace likes to talk about the Brontes. October, nothing but spooky stories that you can play all October long, and, maybe even December and November, when it's even darker and scarier. And November will be Old English Lit. So we're going to be doing stuff like Beowulf and stuff around that neck of the woods. Old English 800 Lit. It's that smooth, mellow lit that gives you more power. Old English 800 Lit. And we don't have anything planned for December. But hey, if you want to pitch in your 2 cents or your, opinion, we'll listen. We'll check it out. And if it's something that we can arrange, then it's something we can do. So your input is always appreciated. Thank you so much. And back to Mary Shelley's The Last Man. Whole lot of walking.
Recorded by Colin McRoberts. The Last Man by Mary Wollstonecraft Shelley, Volume 1, Chapter 5. When we arrived at Windsor, I found that Raymond and Perdita had departed for the Continent. I took possession of my sister's cottage, and blessed myself that I lived within view of Windsor Castle. It was a curious fact that, at this period, when by the marriage of Perdita I was allied to one of the richest individuals in England, and was bound by the most intimate friendship to its chiefest noble, I experienced the greatest excess of poverty that I had ever known. My knowledge of the worldly principles of Lord Raymond would have ever prevented me from applying to him, however deep my distress might have been. It was in vain that I repeated to myself, with regard to Adrian, that his purse was open to me, that one in soul, as we were, our fortunes ought also to be common. I could never, while with him, think of his bounty as a remedy to my poverty, and I even put aside hastily the offers of supplies, assuring him of a falsehood, that I needed them not. How could I say to this generous being, maintain me in idleness, you who have dedicated your powers of mind and fortune to the benefit of your species? Shall you also misdirect your exertions as to support in uselessness the strong, healthy, and capable? And yet I dared not request him to use his influence that I might obtain an honorable provision for myself, for then I should have been obliged to leave Windsor. I hovered forever around the walls of its castle, beneath its enshadowing thickets. My sole companions were my books and my loving thoughts. I studied the wisdom of the ancients, and gazed on the happy walls that sheltered the beloved of my soul. My mind was nevertheless idle. I pored over the poetry of old times. I studied the metaphysics of Plato and Berkeley. I read the histories of Greece and Rome, and of England's former periods, and I watched the movements of the lady of my heart. At night I could see her shadow on the walls of her apartment. By day I viewed her in the flower garden, or riding in the park with her usual companions. Methought the charm would be broken if I were seen, but I heard the music of her voice and was happy. I gave to each heroine of whom I read her beauty and matchless excellence. Such was Antigone, when she guided the blind Oedipus to the grove of the Eumenides, and discharged the funeral rites of Polynices. Such was Miranda in the unvisited cave of Prospero, such Haidee on the sands of the Ionian island. I was mad with excess, passionate devotion, but pride, tameless as fire, invested my nature, and prevented me from betraying myself by word or look. In the meantime, while I thus pampered myself with rich mental repast, a peasant would have disdained my scanty fare, which I sometimes robbed from the squirrels of the forest. I was, I own, often tempted to recur to the lawless feats of my boyhood, and knock down the almost tame pheasants that perched upon the trees, and bend their bright eyes to me. But they were the property of Adrian, the nurslings of Idris, and I, although my imagination, rendered sensual by privation, made me think that they would better become the spit in my kitchen than the green leaves of the forest. Natheless, I checked my haughty will, and did not eat, but supped upon the sentiment, and dreamt vainly of such morsels sweet as I might not waking attain. But at this period the whole scheme of my existence was about to change. The orphan and neglected son of Verney was on the eve of being linked to the mechanism of society by a golden chain, and to enter into all the duties and affections of life. Miracles were to be wrought in my favor. The machine of social life pushed with fast effort backward. Attend, O reader, while I narrate this tale of wonders. One day, as Adrian and Idris were riding through the forest with their mother and accustomed companions, Idris, drawing her brother aside from the rest of the cavalcade, suddenly asked him what had become of my friend Lionel Verney. Even from this spot, replied Adrian, pointing to my sister's cottage, you can see his dwelling. Indeed, said Idris, and why, if he be so near, does he not come to see us, and make one of our society? I often visit him, replied Adrian, but you may easily guess the motives which prevent him from coming where his presence may annoy any one among us. I do not guess them, said Idris, and such as they are, I would not venture to combat them. Tell me, however, in what way he passes his time. What is he doing and thinking in his cottage retreat? Nay, my little sister, replied Adrian, you ask me more than I can well answer. But if you feel interest in him, why not visit him? He will feel highly honored, and thus you may repay a part of the obligation I owe him, and compensate for the injuries fortune has done him." "I will most readily accompany you to his abode," said the lady. "Not that I wish either of us should unburthen ourselves of our debt, which, being no less than your life, must remain unpayable ever. But let us go. Tomorrow we will arrange to ride out together, and proceeding towards that part of the forest, call upon him." The next evening, therefore, though the autumnal change had brought on cold and rain, Adrian and Idris entered my cottage. They found me, curious-like, feasting on sorry fruits for supper, but they brought gifts richer than the golden bribes of the Sabines, nor could I refuse the invaluable store of friendship and delight which they bestowed. Surely the glorious twins of Latona were not more welcome, when, in the infancy of the world, they were brought forth to beauty and enlighten the sterile promontory, than were this angelic pair to my lowly dwelling and grateful heart. We sat like one family around the hearth. Our talk was on subjects unconnected with the emotions that evidently occupied each, but we each divided the other's thoughts, and as our voices spoke of indifferent matters, our eyes, in mute language, told 1,000 things no tongue could have uttered. They left me in an hour's time. They left me happy, how unspeakably happy! It did not require the measured sounds of human language to syllable the story of my ecstasy. Idris had visited me. Idris I should again and again see. My imagination did not wander beyond the completeness of this knowledge. I trod air. No doubt, no fear, no hope even, disturbed me. I clasped with my soul the fullness of contentment, satisfied, undesiring, beatified. For many days Adrian and Idris continued to visit me thus. In this dear intercourse, love, in the guise of enthusiastic friendship, infused more and more of his omnipotent spirit. Idris felt it. Yes, divinity of the world, I read your characters in her looks and gesture. I heard your melodious voice echoed by her. You prepared for us a soft and flowery path. All gentle thoughts adorned it. Your name, O love, was not spoken, but you stood the genius of the hour, veiled in time, but no mortal hand might raise the curtain. Organs of articulate sound did not proclaim the union of our hearts, for untoward circumstance allowed no opportunity for the expression that hovered on our lips. O my pen, haste thou to write what was before the thought of what is. Arrest the hand that guides thee. If I lift up my eyes and see the desert earth, and feel that those dear eyes have spent their mortal luster, and that those beauteous lips are silent, their crimson leaves faded, for ever I am mute. But you live, my Idris. Even now you move before me. There was a glade, O reader, a grassy opening in the wood. The retiring trees left its velvet expanse as a temple for love. The silver Thames bounded it on one side, and a willow, bending down, dipped in the water its naiad hair, dishevelled by the wind's viewless hand. The oaks around were the home of the tribe of nightingales. There am I now. Idris, in youth's dear prime, is by my side. Remember, I am just 22, and 17 summers have scarcely passed over the loved of my heart. The river, swollen by autumnal rains, deluged the lowlands, and Adrian, in his favorite boat, is employed in the dangerous pastime of plucking the topmost bough from a submerged oak. Are you weary of life, O Adrian, that you thus play with danger? He has obtained his prize, and he pilots his boat through the flood. Our eyes were fixed on him fearfully, but the streams carried him away from us. He was forced to land far lower down, and to make a considerable circuit before he could join us. He is safe, said Idris, as he leapt on shore, and waved the bough over his head in token of success. We will wait for him here. We were alone together. The sun had set. The song of the nightingales began. The evening star shone distinct in the flood of light, which was yet unfaded in the west. The blue eyes of my angelic girl were fixed on this sweet emblem of herself. How the light palpitates, she said, which is the star's life. Its vacillating effulgence seems to say that its state, even like ours upon earth, is wavering and inconsistent. It fears, methinks, and it loves. Gaze not on the star, dear, generous friend, I cried, read not love in its trembling rays. Look not upon distant worlds. Speak not of the mere imagination of the sentiment. I have long been silent. Long, even to sickness, I have desired to speak to you, and submit my soul, my life, my entire being to you. Look not on the star, dear love, or do, and let that eternal spark plead for me. Let it be my witness and my advocate. Silent as it shines, love is to me as light to the star. Even so long as that is uneclipsed by annihilation, so long shall I love you. Veiled forever to the world's callous eye, must be the transport of that moment. Still I feel her graceful form press against my full-fraught heart. Still does sight, pulse, and breath sicken and fail at the remembrance of that first kiss. Slowly and silent we went to meet Adrian, whom we heard approaching. I entreated Adrian to return to me after he had conducted his sister home, and that same evening, walking among the moonlit forest paths, I poured forth my whole heart, its transport and its hope, to my friend. For a moment he looked disturbed. I might have foreseen this, he said. What strife will now ensue? Pardon me, Lionel, nor wonder that the expectation of contest with my mother should jar me. What else I should delightedly confess that my best hopes are fulfilled in confiding my sister to your protection. If you do not already know it, you will soon learn the deep hate my mother bears to the name Verney. I will converse with Idris. Then all that a friend can do, I will do. To her it must belong to play the lovers, if she is capable of it. While the brother and sister were still hesitating at the manner they could best attempt to bring their mother over to their party, she, suspecting our meetings, taxed her children with them, taxed her fair daughter with deceit, and an unbecoming attachment for the one whose only merit was being the son of the profligate favorite of her imprudent father, and who was doubtless as worthless as he from whom he boasted his descent. The eyes of Idris flashed at this accusation. She replied, I do not deny that I love Varney. Prove to me that he is worthless, and I will never see him more. Dear madam, said Adrian, let me entreat you to see him, to cultivate his friendship. You will wonder then, as I do, at the extent of his accomplishments and the brilliancy of his talents. Pardon me, gentle reader, this is not futile vanity, not futile, since to know that Adrian felt thus brings joy even to Milo. Mad and foolish boy, exclaimed the angry lady, you have chosen with dreams and theories to overthrow my schemes for your own aggrandizement, but you shall not do the same by those I have formed for your sister. I but too well understand the fascination you both labor under, since I had the same struggle with your father, to make him cast off the parent of this youth, who hid his evil propensities with the smoothness and subtlety of a viper. In those days, how often did I hear of his attractions, his widespread conquests, his wit, his refined manners. It is well when flies only are caught by such spiders' webs, but it is for the high-born and powerful to bow their necks to the flimsy yoke of these unmeaning pretensions. Were your sister indeed the insignificant person she deserves to be, I would willingly leave her to the fate, the wretched fate of the wife of a man whose very person, resembling as it does his wretched father, ought to remind you of the folly and vice it typifies. But remember, Lady Idris, it is not alone the once royal blood of England that courses your veins. You are a princess of Austria, and every life drop is akin to emperors and kings. Are you, then, a fit mate for an uneducated shepherd boy, whose only inheritance is his father's tarnished name? I can make but one defense, replied Idris, the same offered by my brother. See, Lionel, converse with my shepherd boy. The Countess interrupted her indignantly. Yours, she cried, and then smoothing her impassioned features to a disdainful smile, she continued, we will talk of this another time. All I now ask, all your mother Idris requests, is that you will not see this upstart during the interval of 1 month. I dare not comply, said Idris. It would pain him too much. I have no right to play with his feelings, to accept his proffered love, and then sting him with neglect. This is going too far, her mother answered, with quivering lips, and eyes again instinct by anger. Nay, madam, said Adrian, Unless my sister consent never to see him again, it is surely an useless torment to separate them for a month. Certainly, replied the ex-queen with bitter scorn. His love and her love, and both their childish flutterings, are to be put in fit comparison with my years of hope and anxiety, with the duties of the offspring of kings, with the high and dignified conduct which one of her descent ought to pursue. But it is unworthy of me to argue and complain. Perhaps you will have the goodness to promise me not to marry during that interval. This was asked only half ironically, and Idris wondered why her mother should extort from her a solemn vow not to do what she had never dreamt of doing. But the promise was required and given. All went on cheerfully now. We met as usual, and talked without dread of our future plans. The Countess was so gentle, and even beyond her wont amiable with her children, that they began to entertain hopes of her ultimate consent. She was too unlike them, too utterly alien to their tastes, for them to find delight in her society, or in the prospect of its continuance. But it gave them pleasure to see her conciliating and kind. Once even, Adrian ventured to propose her receiving me. She refused with a smile, reminding him that for the present her sister had promised to be patient. One day, after the lapse of nearly a month, Adrian received a letter from a friend in London, requesting his immediate presence for the furtherance of some important object. Guileless himself, Adrian feared no deceit. I rode with him as far as Staines. He was on the high spirits, and since I could not see Idris during his absence, he promised a speedy return. His gaiety, which was extreme, had the strange effect of awakening in me contrary feelings. A presentiment of evil hung over me. I loitered on my return. I counted the hours that must elapse before I saw Idris again. Wherefore should this be? What evil might not happen in the meantime? Might not her mother take advantage of Adrian's absence to urge her beyond her sufferance, perhaps to entrap her? I resolved, let what would befall, to see and converse with her the following day. This determination soothed me. Tomorrow, loveliest and best, hope and joy of my life, tomorrow I will see thee, fool, to dream of a moment's delay. I went to rest. At past midnight I was awakened by a violent knocking. It was now deep winter. It had snowed, and was still snowing. The wind whistled in the leafless trees, despoiling them of their white flakes as they fell. Its drear moaning and the continued knocking mingled wildly with my dreams. At length I was wide awake. Hastily dressing myself, I hurried to discover the cause of this disturbance, and to open my door to the unexpected visitor. Pale as the snow that showered about her, with clasped hands, Idris stood before me. "Save me," she exclaimed, and would have shrunk to the ground had I not supported her. In a moment, however, she revived, and, with energy, almost with violence, she entreated me to saddle horses, to take her away to London, to her brother, at least to save her. I had no horses. She wrung her hands. "What can I do?" she cried. "I am lost. We are both forever lost. But come with me, Lionel. Here I must not stay. We can get a chaise at the nearest post-house. Yet perhaps we have time. Come, oh come with me, to save and protect me." When I heard her piteous demands, while with disordered dress, disheveled hair, and aghast looks, she wrung her hands, the idea shot across me, is she also mad? Sweet one, and I folded her to my heart, better repose than wander further. Rest, my beloved. I will make a fire. You are chilled. Rest, she cried. Repose. You rave, Lionel. If you delay, we are lost. Come, I pray you, unless you would cast me off forever. That Idris, the princely born, nursling of wealth and luxury, should have come through the tempestuous winter night from her regal abode, and, standing at my lowly door, conjure me to fly with her through darkness and storm, was surely a dream. Again, her plaintive tones, the sight of her loveliness, assured me that it was no vision. Looking timidly around, as if she feared to be overheard, she whispered, "I have discovered. Tomorrow, that is, today, already the tomorrow is come. Before dawn, foreigners Austrians, my mother's hirelings, are to carry me off to Germany, prison, to marriage, to anything except you and my brother. Take me away, or soon they will be here." I was frightened by her vehemence, and imagined some mistake in her incoherent tale, but I no longer hesitated to obey her. She had come by herself from the castle, 3 long miles at midnight, through the heavy snow. We must reach Englefield Green, a mile and a half further, before we could obtain a chaise. She told me that she had kept up her strength and courage till her arrival at my cottage, and then both failed. Now she could hardly walk. Supporting her as I did, still she lagged, and at the distance of half a mile, after many stoppages, shivering fits, and half faintings, she slipped from my supporting arms onto the snow, and with a torrent of tears averred that she must be taken, for that she could not proceed. I lifted her up in my arms. Her form rested on my breast. I felt no burden of the contrary and contending emotions. Brimming delight now invested me. Again her chill limbs touched me as a thrill, and I shuddered in sympathy with her pain and fright. Her head lay on my shoulder, her breath waved my hair, her heart beat near mine. Transport made me tremble, blinded me, annihilated me, till a suppressed groan, bursting from her lips, the chattering of her teeth, which she strove vainly to subdue, and all the signs of suffering she evinced, recalled me to the necessity of speed and succor. At last I said to her, "There is Englefield Green, there the inn. But if you are seen thus strangely circumstanced, dear Idris, even now your enemies may learn your flight too soon. Were it not better that I hired a chaise alone? I will put you in safety meanwhile, and return to you immediately." She answered that I was right, and might do with her as I pleased. I observed the door of a small outhouse ajar. I pushed it open, and, with some hay strewed about, I formed a couch for her, placing her exhausted frame in it, and covering her with my cloak. I feared to leave her. She looked so wan and faint, but in a moment she reacquired animation, and with that fear, and again she implored me not to delay, to call upon the people of the inn, and obtain a conveyance and horses, even though I harnessed them myself, was the work of many minutes, each frightened with our weight of ages. I caused the chaise to advance a little, waited till the people of the inn had retired, and then made the postboy draw up the carriage to the spot where Idris, impatient and now somewhat recovered, stood waiting for me. I lifted her into the chaise. I assured her that with our 4 horses we should arrive in London before 5 o'clock, the hour when she would be sought and missed. I besought her to calm herself. A kindly shower of tears relieved her, and by degrees she related her tale of fear and peril. The same night, after Adrian's departure, her mother had warmly expostulated with her on the subject of her attachment to me. Every motive, every threat, every angry taunt was urged in vain. She seemed to consider that through me she had lost Raymond. I was the evil influence of her life. I was even accused of increasing and confirming the mad and base apostasy of Adrian from all views of advancement and grandeur. And now this miserable mountaineer was to steal her daughter. Never, Idris related, did the angry lady deign to recur to gentleness and persuasion. If she had, the task of resistance would have been exquisitely painful. As it was, the sweet girl's generous nature was roused to defend and ally herself with my despised cause. Her mother ended with a look of contempt and covert triumph, which for a moment awakened the suspicions of Idris. When they parted for the night, the Countess said, "Tomorrow I trust your tongue will be changed. Be composed. I have agitated you. Go to rest, and I will send you a medicine I always take when unduly restless. It will give you a quiet night." By the time that she had, with uneasy thoughts, laid her fair cheek upon her pillow, her mother's servant brought a draught. A suspicion again crossed her at this novel proceeding, sufficiently alarming to determine her not to take the potion. But dislike of contention, and a wish to discover whether there was any just foundation for her conjectures, made her, she said, almost instinctively, and in contradiction to her usual frankness, pretended to swallow the medicine. Then, agitated as she had been by her mother's violence, and now unaccustomed fears, she lay unable to sleep, starting at every sound. Soon her door opened softly, and on her springing up, she heard a whisper, "Not asleep yet?" and the door again closed. With a beating heart, she expected another visit, and when, after an interval, her chamber was again invaded, having first assured herself that the intruders were her mother and an attendant, she composed herself to feign sleep. A step approached her bed. She dared not. She strove to calm her palpitations, which became more violent, when she heard her mother say, mutteringly, "Pretty simpleton, little do you think that your game is already at an end forever." For a moment the poor girl fancied that her mother believed that she had drank poison. She was on the point of springing up, when the Countess, already at a distance from the bed, spoke in a low voice to her companion, and again Idris listened. "Hasten," said she, "there is no time to lose. It is long past 11. They will be here at 5. Take merely the clothes necessary for her journey, and her jewel casket." The servant obeyed. Few words were spoken on either side, but those were caught at with avidity by the intended victim. She heard the name of her own maid mentioned. "No, no," replied her mother, "she does not go with us. Lady Idris must forget England and all belonging to it." And again she heard, "She will not wake till late tomorrow, and we shall then be at sea." All is ready. At length the woman announced. The Countess again came to her daughter's bedside. "In Austria, at least," she said, "you will obey. In Austria, where obedience can be enforced, and no choice left but between the honorable prison and a fitting marriage." Both then withdrew, though as she went, the Countess said, "Softly, all sleep, though all have not been prepared for sleep like her. I would not have any one suspect, or she might be roused to resistance, and perhaps escape. Come with me to my room. We will remain there till the hour agreed upon." They went. Idris, panic-struck, but animated and strengthened even by her excessive fear, dressed herself hurriedly, and going down a flight of back stairs, avoiding the vicinity of her mother's apartment, she contrived to escape from the castle by the low window, and came through the snow, wind, and obscurity to my cottage, nor lost her courage until she arrived, and, depositing her fate in my hands, gave herself up to the desperation and weariness that overwhelmed her. I comforted her as well as I might. Joy and exultation were mine, to possess and to save her, yet not to excite fresh agitation in her. Per non turbar quel bel viso sereno. I curbed my delight. I strove to quiet the eager dancing of my heart. I turned from her my eyes, beaming with too much tenderness, and proudly to dark night, and the inclement atmosphere murmured the expressions of my transport. We reached London, methought, all too soon, and yet I could not regret our speedy arrival, when I witnessed the ecstasy with which my beloved girl found herself in her brother's arms, safe from every evil, under his unblamed protection. Adrian wrote a brief note to his mother, informing her that Idris was under his care and guardianship. Several days elapsed, and at last an answer came, dated from Cologne. It was useless, the haughty and disappointed lady wrote, for the Earl of Windsor and his sister to address again the injured parent, whose only expectation of tranquillity must be derived from oblivion of their existence. Her desires had been blasted, her schemes overthrown. She did not complain. In her brother's court she would find, not compensation for their disobedience, filial unkindness admitted of none, but such a state of things and mode of life as might best reconcile her to her fate. Under such circumstances she positively declined any communication with them. Such were the strange and incredible events that finally brought about my union with the sister of my best friend, with my adored Idris. With simplicity and courage she set aside the prejudices and oppositions which were obstacles to my happiness, nor scrupled to give her hand where she had her heart. To be worthy of her, to raise myself to her height through the exertion of talents and virtue, to repay her love with devoted, unwearied tenderness, were the only thanks I could offer for the matchless gift. End of chapter.
Thank you once again for listening to Black Clock Audio Tales. You can find us online at Black Clock Audio Tales on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Meet up with us at pgttcm.com. Find out what's going on with this and other podcasts by Badger Drift Studios, which is where we record this in beautiful North Portland. If you want to be on a show, if you have a book that you would like to have reviewed, if you want to be on Welcome to Portland, eat charcuterie and drink beer in the studio while learning how to podcast, I can accommodate that. But you have to take the first step by going to pgttcm.com and submitting. Send us a link to your stories. Become friends with us on Facebook at PGTTCM or Black Clock Audio Tales. And PGTTCM, of course, is short for The People's Guide to the Cthulhu Mythos, our monthly show. At the end of every month on Tuesday, we have PGTTCM. Thank you so much for listening. Edited by DB Spitzer. Music by Kevin MacLeod as always. Thank you.